This is a story about something that happened to me 7 years ago. My wife Catherine and I had been married 3 years. She was 30 at the time. One day, Catherine collapsed at her part-time job. My mother-in-law called me while I was at work to tell me what had happened, and when I explained the situation to my bosses, they let me leave work early. I took a taxi and rushed from my office to the hospital. It was a 30-minute drive to the hospital, but I was so worried and uneasy that it felt like hours. I remembered how panicked I was, and how I kept repeating to the taxi driver to hurry up. I made it to the hospital and ran to the reception where my mother-in-law had been waiting. She was trembling and tears were flowing down her face. Scared that it must be something very serious, I felt my body go cold. We were showed to a hospital room, and there my wife was, sleeping. The monitor next to Catherine showed that her pulse was healthy. She seemed to be in a stable condition, but I couldn't shake off my uneasiness. A doctor joined us and explained to us what had happened in a calm voice. Though Catherine had only just turned 30 and was still young, she seemed to have a heart condition that generally affected older people. Because of that, she had collapsed. They had to do an emergency operation, but now her condition was stable and her life wasn't in danger anymore. My mother-in-law and I finally breathed a sigh of relief. Because of the illness, it was possible that Catherine could be paralyzed and have difficulty moving. It was even possible that she could become bedridden. Though I was relieved for the moment, I wonder how I could explain this all to Catherine when she wakes up. As long as it meant Catherine is alive, I didn't care how much money I had to pay. When she finds out she might become bedridden one day, she'll probably become very depressed. So how should I explain this to her when she wakes up? But when she woke up, Catherine was surprisingly cool-headed. "I'm sorry for making you worry," Catherine said with a smile, but that smile only made my heart hurt. "It's okay, I'm just glad you're alright now," was all I could say. A few days later, Catherine's condition was much better. The doctors advised her that she might feel a light tingling on her body now, but that it would probably go away soon. Regardless, she would need rest to be able to heal completely, so they all advised Catherine to rest at home without working for a while. When she was discharged, Catherine was doing much better, but it was definitely hard for her to move. She more or less was stuck in her bed. The doctors said she'd be better soon, but we didn't know when exactly that would be. It could be tomorrow, it could be in a year from now. Anyway, I didn't want to burden Catherine, so I hired a helper to be with her during the day. Catherine laughed and told me I was overreacting, but I didn't think so. She couldn't even go to the toilet on her own, and I was concerned she might collapse again. We never knew what might happen. We didn't have kids, and my wife quit her part-time job. I was afraid that if something happened during the day, no one would be there to notice and help her. I explained this all to my wife, and she agreed. So from the next day on, a young woman began coming to help her during the day. The helper was a bright girl who got along well with Catherine quickly. Within a few days, they were like old friends. Even after I'd come home from work, Catherine and her helper would continue chatting with each other. Being suddenly stuck at home like this, I'm sure Catherine must feel lonely, so I'm relieved to see her having fun now every day. 5 years passed. The doctor said Catherine would get better soon, but that didn't happen. She hasn't collapsed again since then, but she still can't move around freely. If she's in the kitchen, she can stand in one place, but she can't move around without help. She continued living with aid of her helper. Catherine's previous helper had gotten married and quit her job after 2 years, so now she has someone else by her side. Since I'm not home during the day, I've never met her new helper, but Catherine has told me it's a wonderful person. I was glad that Catherine got along with her helper, but I felt uneasy. When will Catherine be able to move on her own again? Because it's a heart problem, there are many uncertainties, which is probably why the doctors couldn't say for sure when she'd get better. Since Catherine was basically bedridden, unless her condition didn't suddenly worsen, she didn't have to go to the hospital. Catherine continued to live with the support of her helper. One weekend I was watching TV, and the program I had switched to began to discuss the salaries of lawyers and at-home helpers. The conclusion was that their pay was too low for the service they provided. Our helper really saved Catherine and I. Though maybe it's a bit embarrassing, I left managing our household expenses 100% to my wife. She was also the one who handled the helper's contract, so I honestly didn't know how much we were paying them. If it was a low salary, I felt bad. If we had some spare cash, maybe we should pay our helper more. I went to Catherine to ask her how much we paid her helper, but Catherine had fallen asleep. I didn't want to wake her up, so I rummaged around and found our bank account passbook. Looking through the passbook, the helper's salary wasn't listed anywhere. Here and there, some money was withdrawn from our account, but that was it. Could she be paying her helper in cash? Those mysterious withdrawals worked multiple times a month, and for different amounts of money. I hadn't given my wife any other accounts or credit cards, so she could only withdraw money from this one. I thought it was a bit weird, but decided it wasn't serious enough to ask Catherine about it. A few days later, more money was withdrawn from our account. I didn't suspect that my wife was doing anything wrong. I simply wondered how we were paying her helper. What were those random withdrawals? If she was using them on a new hobby or something, that'd be great, but I wondered what kind of hobby could cost that much money. Since Catherine doesn't leave the house much, I wondered what kind of at-home hobby could require that much money. Many questions swirled around my head until I finally brought it up to my coworker and friend, Wade. I wasn't the type to usually talk about my family matters at work, but I was so concerned that I couldn't help it. We hadn't made a bank transfer to Catherine's helper in 2 years. Instead, there were random withdrawals made from our shared bank account. When I brought it up to Wade, he asked, "Are you sure that a helper is really coming over every day?" My jaw dropped open. Honestly, that had crossed my mind, but I had told myself there's no way. I replied, "There's no way." But it's true that in the past few years, Catherine spoke about her helper way less than before. When Catherine became close friends with her first helper 5 years ago, she spoke about her often. So I just thought that maybe Catherine wasn't as close to her new helper. Wade saw me deep in thought and asked, "How much money gets withdrawn from your account each time?" "Around $200. $200? And you said that she makes withdrawals often, right? How come you didn't notice until now?" I couldn't help but agree with him. I thought to myself that leaving Catherine to take care of the household expenses was too lax of me. I couldn't come up with what to reply. In a firm voice, Wade said, "This is weird. You should definitely look into this." I probably turned to him because I wanted someone to say that to me. It's a bit lame, but I hadn't done anything so far because I was afraid to act on my own. I loved my wife and trusted her, which is why I didn't want to have these suspicious thoughts floating around my head. But no matter how you looked at it, it was suspicious. Wade had advised me to not talk to Catherine about it directly, so feeling frustrated, I set up cameras around my home. So that she wouldn't notice, I set them up when she was asleep, and hid them around the furniture and in hard-to-reach places. My heart was full of guilt. If Catherine wasn't doing anything wrong and she happened to find one of the cameras, I worried I would hurt her feelings. As I set up the cameras, I prayed that I wouldn't capture Catherine doing anything wrong, and that she wouldn't find any of the cameras. The next evening, I decided to check the cameras after my wife had fallen asleep. I carefully got out of bed and hid in the closet on the other side of the house. When I saw what the cameras had recorded, it was difficult to stop myself from screaming. 10 minutes after I left for work that morning, my wife stood up from bed and walked out of her room. My wife wasn't supposed to be able to stand and walk on her own. When she came back into her bedroom, she was wearing thick makeup and fancy clothes. She watched TV in her room until right before lunch, when our doorbell rang. She ran to the door, and I could hear her talking sweetly to some man in the distance. After some time, my wife and a young man entered our room and laid in our bed together. I couldn't watch what came next, so I sped through the recording, but they were at it for a long time. My wife was supposed to be bedridden, but she had no problem getting into all sorts of positions with that man. I felt like I was about to puke. Finally, the two of them stopped having sex and calmed down. I put the video back to regular speed and saw my wife pull out bills from under our bed and handed them to the man. I couldn't hear what they were saying very well. Well, the recording itself was very clear, but I was so shocked that there was ringing in my ears, so nothing from the video could register in my head. I was stunned for a while, but a few hours later it finally hit me what was happening. Catherine was all better. She could move around freely, so she had no need to hire or pay for a helper. Instead, she would withdraw money every once in a while to give to that man. I didn't know how she met that man, nor did I know how long this has been going on. I wondered how I hadn't noticed until now. Catherine hadn't changed at all in the last 5 years, but everything was an act, and she was all better now. I'm an idiot. I understood that so well that it hurt. I knew the truth now, so I couldn't just unsee those videos. For a few days, I couldn't decide what to do, but I had recovered from my shock a bit, so I set up the cameras once again and continued to watch my wife's actions. One after another, his wife's misdeeds were revealed. It was always the same man. He was a little flirty and wore brand-name goods. They spoke as if they were comfortable with each other, so I assumed they'd been dating for at least a few months now. A few weeks passed. It was dinner time one Saturday. I had made dinner as usual, and Catherine was watching TV. She was eating without paying much attention to her food. Suddenly, Catherine's flirty voice rang across the room. "Davy, I missed you." Catherine dropped her fork. She was obviously shaken. I stared at the TV unbothered. The videos I had secretly recording were playing on the TV screen. Catherine began desperately reaching for the TV remote, but I grabbed it before she could. "What is going on?" Catherine went pale. She seemed to be considering whether she should make up an excuse. She was trembling and looking into the distance. "Explain to me what's going on." The room went silent again, and then in a small voice, Catherine said, "I'm sorry." Out of nowhere, she fell to the ground on her hands and knees and screamed, "I'm sorry!" In a trembling voice, she began to explain everything. 5 years ago, it was true that she collapsed because of her heart condition. Within a few weeks, she began to be able to move as normal, so she was relieved. But she didn't want to let go of the life she was living, so she decided to pretend her condition hadn't improved. Not that she hated her part-time job, but she enjoyed being looked after. Around that time, her first helper, who she had become close friends with, began to talk to her about an escort club she visited. Catherine's helper told her that she would go to that club to relieve stress. She would enjoy paying to drink with handsome men, within her financial limits, of course. Since Catherine didn't have much experience with men, nor with that sort of nightlife, she was very envious of her helper. She was unsatisfied that I hadn't suggested we have sex since she collapsed, and she felt that I didn't see her as a woman anymore. From my point of view, I had just been restraining myself out of concern for her, so the fact that she was just pretending to be bedridden and had the nerve to complain, I felt like she was incredibly selfish. Since she didn't feel like a woman with me anymore, she would secretly leave the house to visit escort clubs during the day, and she got hooked. Unlike her helper, who was able to restrain herself, Catherine fell in too deep, and soon began using up all her money. She decided to use the money she usually paid her helper to go to clubs, so she secretly cancelled her contract with her helper. But even when she stopped having to pay the helper, visiting the clubs was still too expensive for her. She discussed this with her favorite escort, and he agreed to come to our house if she paid him. So that man was an escort. He wasn't even successful or popular at his club. He just wanted money, which is why he continued his relationship with my wife. After she finished speaking, I asked, "So, you're all better now?" Not able to make eye contact with me, Catherine silently nodded. I let out a big sigh and handed Catherine divorce papers. She looked at me in a panic. "I'm really sorry. I will do anything, so please, don't divorce me." It's true, in order to continue not working and visiting escorts, she needed my money, but there was no reason for me not to divorce her. I was stupid enough to not notice Catherine's affair these past 5 years, but that didn't mean I could let it go. "I will divorce you, and I will claim compensation from you as well. Of course, I will also tell both of our families about this." "There's no need to tell my parents, is there?" Catherine suddenly said in a frenzy. "This all happened because you didn't treat me like a woman," she screamed hysterically. I ignored her. I've done so much for Catherine's sake until now, but that was all for nothing. Catherine has been perfectly fine all this time, and she obviously didn't love me at all anymore. The reason she didn't want to divorce me is that she wanted to use my money on that other man. I knew that already, so there was no point in us being together anymore. Afterwards, I hired a lawyer and with their help went through the divorce process. I managed to get a divorce and claim compensation from Catherine. Of course, I also claimed compensation from her lover. I made sure I got back all the money Catherine had given him, and then some. I also spoke to her parents about what had happened. Her parents and mine all thought Catherine was bedridden, so they couldn't believe what I was telling them at first, but when I showed them the videos, they couldn't deny it anymore. My in-laws were especially mad, and they ended up disowning Catherine. With no one else to turn to, Catherine went to her lover, but since he had to pay me so much money in compensation, he rejected her. I don't know where Catherine is or what she's doing, but since I'm getting alimony payments transferred to me every month, she's definitely alive somewhere. Well, she doesn't matter to me anymore. When I first discovered Catherine's affair, I was able to keep my anger in check, but after all this ended, I lost all energy and felt depressed. It really was a big shock to discover that the wife I loved had been deceiving me all this time. I told everything to Wade and he replied, "Why didn't you realize earlier, you idiot?" and patted me on the back. Everyone else I told would get flustered and didn't know what to say to me, so I was grateful for Wade's attitude. Thanks to how he reacted, I look back at this all as a funny story now. I wonder why I hadn't noticed earlier. I should have been more serious with my wife. I don't regret divorcing her at all. I still have a long life ahead of me, so I plan to leave this in the past and move on. Thank you for watching. Did you enjoy? If you did, please check out our other videos and subscribe to our channel below.